Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the most famous maritime mystery of all time, the Mary Celeste. For over 150 years, this whole story has been drowning in rumors, right? Sea monsters, alien abductions, and wild paranormal theories. But today, we are officially separating a century and a half of pure fiction from hard scientific fact. So let's start with a massive contrarian truth right off the bat. Pretty much the entire popular legend of this ghost ship, it's a lie. Seriously, everything you think you know about it is probably fabricated. So we're going to roll up our sleeves and look at the actual forensic evidence, the historical records, and even some cutting-edge 21st century chemistry to finally put this thing to rest. Which brings us to Section 1, the ghost ship myth. Okay, to really understand the truth, we first have to look at the viral pop culture myth. You know the spooky, sensational details you've probably heard before? Things like steaming mugs of tea left on tables, half-eaten breakfasts, a clock literally ticking backwards, and, my personal favorite, the ship's cat just left purring by a warm galley stove. It paints this incredibly vivid picture of a crew that vanished into thin air, right in the middle of their daily routine, doesn't it? But let's look at the facts in Section 2, the real crime scene. Let's step into the shoes of a forensic investigator for a second. When you actually compare that mythical, spooky state of the ship to what the boarding party from the day Gratia actually found, the contrast is absolutely staggering. There was zero warm food. The ship was, well, a thoroughly wet mess. They found a disassembled water pump, a rusted sword in its sheath, and a missing yawl, which is just a small lifeboat. So the really crucial takeaway here is that all this physical evidence screams a panicked, sudden evacuation into the freezing Atlantic. Not some bizarre alien abduction where people just beamed up, leaving their tea warm. And hey, before we get completely lost in the mechanics of the mystery, we have to remember the 10 real human beings who were actually on board. We're talking about Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 highly capable crewmen. These were real people, and their lives depended entirely on the seaworthiness of this boat. Captain Briggs was deeply respected. He was known for being highly rational, incredibly experienced, and a staunch abstainer from alcohol. He absolutely wasn't a guy prone to irrational, sudden panic. So what exactly did they leave behind? Well, the boarding party discovered the ship's cargo of exactly 1,701 barrels of highly flammable industrial alcohol. And honestly, this is brilliant because this perfectly intact cargo immediately rules out one of the most popular early theories, which was piracy. I mean, think about it. Pirates just do not leave behind a literal fortune in untouched cargo. It makes no sense. But they did find something deeply concerning. 3.5 feet of water just sloshing around in the bottom of the ship's hold. And right next to this water, a single disassembled pump and a sounding rod just abandoned on the deck. This is a massive clue. It tells us that someone was desperately trying to measure the water levels right before they fled the ship. Now, if we map out the timeline, it reveals something even weirder. The Mary Celeste leaves New York on November 7th. The very last entry in the ship's log was made at 8 a.m. on November 25th, which places them near the Azores. But she wasn't actually discovered by the Dea Gratia until December 5th. Guys, that is a massive, silent 10-day gap, where this completely empty ship just sailed itself across the open ocean. So how did this happen? Let's get into Section 3, how fiction hijacked history. If the actual crime scene was so remarkably mundane, how on earth did it become this wild paranormal legend? Well, the answer is right here. In 1884, a 25-year-old doctor and aspiring writer named Arthur Conan Doyle, yep, the exact same guy who'd go on to create Sherlock Holmes, published an anonymous short story in Cornhill magazine. He basically hijacked the whole historical narrative. He slightly changed the ship's name to the Mary Celeste and just invented this wildly sensational and frankly incredibly racist tale involving a vengeful ex-slave, brutal murder, and magic stones. And this is just a brilliant illustration of the power of the press. Doyle's story was 100% fabricated fiction, but the public largely swallowed it as absolute fact. I mean, newspapers were actually reprinting it as a true survivor's account. It's kind of the ultimate meta lesson in how easily sensationalism can permanently overwrite historical truth in the public's mind. It was literally the 19th century version of viral fake news. Which leads us nicely into Section 4, Monsters, Mutiny, and Myths. Before we reveal the true scientific solution, we've got to eliminate the completely false theories that plagued the official investigation. The official investigator over in Gibraltar, Attorney General Frederick Sully Flood, was absolutely stubbornly convinced that the crew broke into the alcohol, got roaring drunk, murdered the captain and his family, and just took off. His entire theory rested on alleged blood found on that rusted sword. But here's the reality check. 19th century chemistry actually proved shortly after that the so-called blood was really just a chemical reaction between lemon juice and iron citrate. No blood, no mutiny, just bad science. We can also easily toss out the rest of the sensational list. Giant squids? They don't steal navigation equipment. The Bermuda Triangle? The ship wasn't even anywhere near it. We already talked about pirates. They wouldn't leave 1,701 barrels of incredibly valuable alcohol behind. And as for some elaborate insurance fraud, come on, you don't drag your wife and 2-year-old daughter into the middle of the Atlantic to commit a highly dangerous maritime fraud. Absolutely none of these explain the intact cargo or the missing empty yawl. So let's get to the truth in Section 5. Modern science solves it. To find the real answer to this 150-year-old mystery, we literally have to fast forward to 21st century science. In April 2026, chemist Jack Robotham at the University of Manchester conducted these amazing scaled experiments that finally provided the missing key. He proved that leaking ethanol vapor from those 9 empty, porous red oak barrels they found in the cargo hold could cause something called a deflagration. What's that? Well, it's a rapid pressure wave that happens without leaving any visible flames or soot behind. Just put yourself on that ship for a minute. This pressure wave would have resulted in a silent, kind of muffled, but absolutely terrifying explosion from below decks that literally blew the heavy cargo hatches right open. I mean, that would easily convince any rational captain that his ship, which remember is packed to the brim with highly flammable alcohol, was seconds away from turning into a giant fireball. Yet, because of the snaky nature of deflagration, it wouldn't leave a single scorch mark on the wood. Crazy, right? Now, when you combine this totally new chemistry with some incredible research by documentarian Anne McGregor, we finally see the whole complete picture. It wasn't just one thing going wrong. It was a cascading failure, a perfect storm. First, rough seas and a faulty chronometer cause massive navigational panic. Then, coal dust from a previous voyage clogs up the water pumps, meaning they couldn't even tell if the ship was sinking. And then, boom, the ethanol vapor deflagration blows the hatches off. Faced with what he truly believed was an imminent catastrophic explosion, Captain Briggs made a completely rational call. He ordered an immediate but temporary evacuation into the yawl. And the weather conditions just made everything 10 times worse. McGregor actually used modern iCode's weather databases to prove that Briggs' faulty chronometer had him 120 miles west of where he thought he was. They had been battling brutal 35-knot winds. Imagine how much that amplifies your panic when a literal explosion pops the hatches off your cargo hold. So they evacuate into the small yawl. It is highly, highly probable that Briggs, being the incredibly experienced sailor that he was, tethered that small yawl to the Mary Celeste with a thick tow line. His plan was probably just to wait out the fumes and the explosion at a safe distance, but in those brutal winds and those violently heavy seas, that tow line snapped, and they were just left there helplessly bobbing in a tiny rowboat, watching the Mary Celeste literally sail itself away empty. And honestly, this is exactly why this explainer matters so much. By applying modern forensic meteorology, historical data, and 21st century chemistry, we've entirely dismantled a pop culture ghost story. We've stripped away the giant squids and the fake news to reveal something much more grounded and, frankly, so much more poignant. It was a cascade of terrible mechanical failures that led to a profoundly human tragedy. I'll leave you with this final, genuinely chilling thought to take away from all this. Solving the mechanical mystery of why they abandoned the ship, it doesn't make the story less scary. Actually, scratch that. It makes it so much worse, because now we know exactly what happened. Just imagine the horrifying reality that family and crew experienced, adrift in a tiny rowboat in the freezing Atlantic, probably screaming for help as they watched their perfectly good, completely safe ship slowly disappear over the horizon forever. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this completely changes how you view this legendary piece of history. Catch you next time.